On July 8th, 2024, at 2:37 p.m., an oil crew working a long-abandoned drill site outside Turlinga, Texas, encountered an unexpected obstacle. Their powerful drills, having penetrated 16 feet into the earth, suddenly shuddered, groaned, and came to an abrupt halt. Initially, the workers assumed they had hit an old pipe from previous wells, a common occurrence in that arid, desolate landscape. However, as they began clearing away the debris and dust, something entirely different came into view. It wasn't a pipe, but the roof of a truck. By 4:05 p.m., a unit from the local sheriff's office had arrived at the scene. 17 minutes later, at 4:22 p.m., Deputy Martinez contacted Thomas Walker. Then, at 5:11 p.m., Thomas stood staring intently at the old, rust-covered pickup truck. Held by chains, it hung precariously over a gaping sinkhole in the desert, its shattered windshield catching the last, fading rays of the setting sun. He needed no further confirmation. He recognized the vehicle instantly. It was the very truck he had bought for his daughter, Savannah, when she turned 25. The same vehicle she had driven away in 9 years ago, on a quiet Thursday evening, never to return. The sky over Alpine that day seemed flat and blazing like a hot griddle. Thomas Walker was under the hood of his tractor, sleeve casually rolled up, hands blackened with motor oil. He hadn't expected visitors in a long time, especially after 9 years of agonizing silence. So, when a patrol car crunched up the gravel road, he slowly straightened, reaching for a rag in his back pocket, more out of habit than any hope. Deputy Martinez was the first to emerge from the vehicle. The man had been on this land hundreds of times, each visit bringing bad news with a polite detachment that betrayed his inability to grow accustomed to such a role. This time, he removed his hat, which never boded well. "Mr. Walker," he said, "we need to talk." Thomas squinted, his gaze piercing. "About what?" Martinez hesitated for only a moment. "We believe we've found your daughter's vehicle in the desert. Buried." The rag slipped from Thomas's fingers. "Buried," he repeated, his voice sounding dry even to himself. "You mean someone buried her truck and no one noticed for almost 10 years? Martinez's jaw tightened. Oilmen stumbled upon it by accident. They were drilling a test well on an old site and hit metal. They contacted us immediately once they realized what it was. Thomas wiped his hands on his jeans, his mind already elsewhere. "And you want me to come confirm it's hers?" "We need confirmation," Martinez replied. "It's evidence now." Thomas nodded slowly. "Let me tell my foreman I'll be gone for a bit." He left a wrench lying in the dirt. The drive to the discovery site took almost 2 hours, winding through brush and along faded fence lines. Thomas sat in silence in the back seat, his body still, but his mind far from calm. The truck had been gone for 9 years. It hadn't been dismantled, burned, or dumped in a river. It had been buried, like a carefully hidden secret. They reached the perimeter shortly after sunset. The air was cooling, but a suffocating heat still hung low over the ground. Powerful floodlights had been set up, bathing the area in harsh light. A crane slowly, with almost reverent caution, lifted the truck from the earth as if it were incredibly fragile. Dirt showered from its underside as the vehicle finally emerged, revealing shattered glass, flat tires, and once bright red paint almost entirely worn away by relentless time. Detective Rodriguez greeted him at the caution tape. "Mr. Walker," he said, extending a hand. "Long time no see." Thomas looked past him at the truck. "Not long enough." Rodriguez led him under the tape into the center of the chaos. A folding table was set up nearby under a pop-up tent, covered with plastic evidence bags, a wallet, a necklace, a multi-tool, a worn tire gauge. Thomas gasped. "She never took that cross off," he said, pointing. "It was her mother's." "And this," Rodriguez held up the multi-tool. "I gave her that," Thomas replied. "Told her to keep it in the glove compartment, just in case." Rodriguez nodded, his voice even and dispassionate. "We didn't find any remains in the truck, but this definitely wasn't an accident." Thomas surveyed the desert, so vast and so empty. "So, someone buried her truck in the middle of nowhere," he said, "and made sure no one would find it." Rodriguez didn't argue, for it was an undeniable truth. And this was just the beginning. July 9th, 2024, 8:12 a.m. Thomas Walker hadn't slept. He'd spent the entire night sitting on the edge of his bed, elbows on his knees, the house utterly silent. Outside, cicadas hummed monotonously in the dark, then fell silent just before dawn. He watched the sky change from deep black to slate, then to a grayish blue. At 7:03, he fed the horses. At 7:36, he brewed coffee, strong enough, it seemed, to strip paint. By 8 o'clock, he was back in his office, the same one where a faded photograph of Savannah hung on the corkboard behind his desk. In the picture, she was 27, smiling, one leg in the stirrup of her bay horse. That was a year before she didn't come home. The knock on the door was light at first, then repeated more insistently. He opened the door to find Sheriff Clayton Ridge. The same brown uniform, the same carefully neutral expression. His presence didn't surprise Thomas. The sheriff had a habit of showing up when least expected. "Morning, Tom," Ridge said, removing his hat. "Can we talk?" Thomas stepped aside without a word. The sheriff followed him into the back office, where the morning light poured generously onto the desk. The air in the room smelled of dust, strong black coffee, and old paper. "Are you here for a statement?" Thomas asked, sinking into the chair behind the desk. "I'm here to review your timeline," Ridge replied. "After what turned up yesterday, we're reopening the investigation from scratch. Isn't Rodriguez supposed to be handling that?" Thomas countered. "He's reviewing the physical evidence," Ridge said smoothly. "Meanwhile, I'm making the rounds. You're first." Thomas nodded slowly, then said, "Then let's not waste time." The sheriff opened his notepad. July 17th, 2015. You stated Savannah left the ranch around 8 p.m. to move cattle to the west pasture. Confirm. Yes. You remained here for the rest of the evening, in this office, doing paperwork. What time did you notice she hadn't returned? 11. And you went looking? Yes. Found the herd, still grazing, but no sign of her. I figured maybe she had truck trouble. Camped out by the line. She'd done that before. And you didn't call anyone. Not until morning. 5 a.m. Why wait? Thomas's jaw tightened. Because I wasn't panicked. Because I trusted her. She wasn't a child. She was a missing person, Ridge countered. And by the time we got the call, 12 hours had passed. Thomas leaned forward. "You're not here for a timeline. You're here to make me a suspect." The sheriff didn't blink. "It's not personal. It's standard procedure in cases like this." After 9 years, with that truck buried 15 feet underground, someone knew exactly what they were doing. That takes time, tools, seclusion. "And you think I had that?" Thomas said incredulously. "That I stayed up all night, moving her truck, then came home, cleaned myself up, and called you like nothing happened? We have to consider all options." "No," Thomas said, "you don't. You're looking for the easy way out." Ridge closed his notepad. "Where were your ranch hands that night?" "Gone. They don't live on the property, so no one can corroborate your alibi." Thomas slowly, deliberately stood up. "I was here just like I said. If you want to dig holes in my yard, go right ahead. But while you're wasting time casting suspicion, someone out there is still free. Someone who buried my daughter's truck and left no trace." The sheriff stood, adjusted his belt, and said nothing. As he left, he paused by Savannah's photograph. "She was a good rider," he said. "That mare of hers, a very smart animal." Thomas didn't reply. Ridge left without another word. By 10:20 a.m., Thomas Walker was driving his truck down County Road 287 toward town. A plume of dust rose behind him, like smoke dissipating into the air. He wasn't entirely sure what he was looking for, but something about Sheriff Ridge's questions, their timing, their tone, unsettled him. It wasn't that the sheriff focused on him, but that there were other places, other people, far more deserving of questioning. He needed a place to think, somewhere quiet but not lonely. The Dusty Spur Tavern opened at 11 a.m. during branding season, as ranchers didn't keep city hours. When he pushed open the creaking door, the place was almost empty. Only the low hum of country music from the jukebox broke the silence, and the smell of stale beer was deeply ingrained in the wooden surfaces. Jake, the bartender, looked up from wiping glasses. Tom, he said in surprise. Didn't expect to see you this early. Didn't expect to be here, Thomas replied. Jake nodded, poured his usual straight whiskey, and slid it over. Thomas took a stool at the far end, the one with a view of the front window. For a while, he just sat, sipping his drink, watching the dust swirl outside like ghosts with nowhere to go. He was halfway through his second when a voice behind him said, "Mind if I join you?" Thomas turned. A man in his 40s stood there, dark-haired, wearing worn road boots. A stranger, but not unfriendly. He introduced himself. "I'm Barry," the man said, "Barry Granger." Thomas Walker shook the outstretched hand. Walker. The name made Barry pause. Walker, he repeated, softer now. "You wouldn't happen to be the one whose truck they found yesterday?" "I am." Barry hesitated. "I'm looking for someone. My brother, Terry Granger. He used to work here. Highway Patrol. Quit back in 2015. No one's seen him since." Thomas stared at him. "Terry," he said. "Terry was on my daughter's case. Helped pull traffic camera records. And then nothing. One day he was here, the next he was gone." Barry nodded. "That's why I'm here." He didn't leave a note. No call, no new address, just vanished. "The department told me he moved to Mexico. But that's not like Terry." "No," Thomas said slowly. "It's not." He gestured for Jake to pour another. "You think your brother's disappearance has something to do with my daughter?" Barry asked. "Didn't used to," Thomas said. "But I do now." For the next hour, they exchanged details. Barry had tried contacting the police, but got nowhere. No records, no new address, not even a resignation letter, just a name scratched off the roster. Thomas found himself watching Barry closely. His posture, his voice. He wasn't a liar. He didn't sound crazy. Rather, he sounded like someone looking for the same thing. Thomas was a thread that still led somewhere. "Come with me," Thomas said, finally finishing his drink. "Let's go see the detective, the one who called me yesterday. Rodriguez. If anyone has a file on your brother, it's him." Barry hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you." The Alpine police station was a squat brick building, modestly tucked behind a Shell gas station. In 9 years, it hadn't changed at all. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of paper and rubber soles. Officer Patricia Hernandez, one of the few names Thomas still recognized, was at the front desk. "Mr. Walker," she said in surprise. "Twice in 2 days. I need to speak with Rodriguez." "He's not in," she replied, checking her monitor. "Left about an hour ago." Thomas pointed to Barry. "This is Terry Granger's brother. He's trying to find out what happened to him." Patricia's smile faded. "I remember you from yesterday," she told Barry. "And like I told you then, we have nothing on file. When Terry left, he just left." Barry nodded politely, but his eyes were tight with disappointment. Thomas turned to the window just as a black SUV pulled into the parking lot. "Speak of the devil," Patricia said. "That's the sheriff." Thomas watched the car park, but the sheriff didn't get out. That he sat in the driver's seat, phone pressed to his ear. "Strange," Barry said. "You'd think he'd go inside if he was back." Thomas squinted. "Wait here," he said. "I need to grab something from my truck." He crossed the parking lot, casually walking behind the sheriff's SUV. The windows were slightly open for ventilation, and voices drifted out. "Handle this quickly," Ridge was saying. "We don't have time for mistakes." "Then, Bones, get rid of them." Thomas slowed his pace. Another voice message, quieter, mumbled something indistinct. Then Ridge again, "Not Terry Granger. No one cares about him. Just make sure he stays missing." Thomas stopped. A heat pricked his skin, not from the sun, but from sudden clarity. He turned and walked quickly back to the front doors where Barry waited. "Did you hear something?" Barry asked, alarmed. Thomas nodded. "Get in the truck." "What was it, sir?" "Just get in now." They pulled out of the lot without headlights, turning onto the main road, following the sheriff's SUV at a distance. Thomas's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. "Are you sure he said Terry's name?" Barry asked. "He said, not Terry Granger. That no one cares. He was on the phone." "About Bones," Barry paled. "I think your brother knew something," Thomas said. "I think he tried to do the right thing. And I think Ridge made sure he disappeared." They drove silently behind the SUV. The roads grew emptier. Then the car ahead swerved sharply, kicking up dust as it left the asphalt. "Where's he going?" Barry asked. Thomas didn't answer. He just kept driving. July 9th, 2024, 4:58 p.m. Thomas parked his truck 100 yards off the dirt road, behind a thick bush that provided ample cover. Dust still hung in the air, stirred by the sheriff's SUV, which had turned onto the gravel drive just minutes before. Ahead, barely visible in the fading light, lay an old farmhouse, grayed by time. The place was too quiet, yet not abandoned. Lights glowed in the windows. Another car, a dark sedan, pulled up from the opposite direction. Thomas and Barry watched as three men exited. One went to the back seat and opened the door. They pulled someone out. Whoever was stumbled, their wrists bound, eyes blindfolded. Barry clutched the dashboard. Oh my God. They didn't use the front door. They didn't knock. They led the figure around the house to what looked like an outbuilding, perhaps a stable or a tool shed. "Tell me that wasn't who I think it was," Barry whispered. "I don't know who it was," Thomas replied. "But I know Ridge didn't even get out of his car." They watched the men return to their vehicle and drive off toward town. The sheriff remained for a few more minutes, his SUV still idling, before backing up and continuing down the road, away from town, away from everything. Thomas reached for his phone. He called Rodriguez. "Detective," Thomas said as soon as the line connected, "we've been following Sheriff Ridge. He met someone at a farm off County Road 113. They delivered a bound and blindfolded person and put them in his trunk." There was a long pause on the other end. Then, "Are you absolutely sure? I saw it with my own eyes." And so did Barry. Barry leaned in and confirmed it. Rodriguez's voice grew tighter, colder. "You said Ridge left about 2 minutes ago. Heading north. Looks like he's going to the Hartley property. Do you know the place?" "Yes," Rodriguez said. "Abandoned for years, recently owned by a firm that went bankrupt. I'm sending units now." But Thomas listened carefully. "Don't approach. Let us handle it." Thomas hung up without answering. His keys were already in his hand. Barry grabbed his arm. "Don't be foolish. We don't even know who's in there. Let the police do their job. It could be Savannah, or it could be a trap. Ridge might have known you were following him. It could be a decoy." Thomas stared at the road ahead. The sun had almost set. The stables and house cast long shadows, his gut twisting with fear. "I'm not leaving if my daughter's in there." "I understand," Barry said, "but don't make rescuing her the last thing you do. Wait for backup. We'll see this through." Thomas finally nodded and waited this time. It didn't take long. 10 minutes later, two unmarked cruisers silently pulled onto the road behind them. Officers emerged from both sides, weapons drawn, moving like shadows in formation, tactical vests, radios hanging low. Rodriguez arrived a minute later, stepping out of the passenger seat and nodding to Thomas without a word. They moved toward the ranch. Thomas and Barry stayed behind, but not out of sight. They advanced slowly behind one of the cruisers, close enough to see. Light cut through the barn windows. Raised, panicked voices erupted. A woman screamed, then the sound of shuffling feet. "Resistance! Go, go, go," someone yelled. Officers stormed the barn. The confrontation was brief. A minute, maybe two. Then Ridge was let out in handcuffs. His uniform shirt was unbuttoned, his expression venomous. When he saw Thomas, his lips twisted. "You should have stayed away," Ridge said. "You have no idea what you just got yourself into." Rodriguez walked past him without a glance, heading straight for the SUV. A young officer held up the sheriff's phone. "Detective, you'll want to see this." Rodriguez scrolled through the screen, his face hardening. "They were planning to move her," he muttered. "Simulate a burial, stage a death. Bury fake bones on a border property. Make her disappear again." "Bones?" Barry asked. "What bones?" "Pig bones," Rodriguez replied. "They fragment like human remains after enough time. They were going to mix them with pieces of her clothing." He looked up. "They've done this before." Thomas was silent. He looked toward the barn. A team of paramedics emerged, carrying a stretcher. On it lay a woman, emaciated, pale, barely conscious. Dirt smudged her face. Her wrists were bruised and bound. Her dark hair was matted. Thomas didn't need to ask. He recognized that face, even after 9 years. He stepped forward. The paramedics let him pass. Her eyes slowly opened, unfocused, then sharpened on him. "Dad," she rasped. Her voice was a dry, barely audible whisper, but it cut through everything. He knelt beside her, gently taking her hand in both of his. "I'm here," he said. "I'm here, sweetie." She trembled, tried to sit up. The medic stopped her. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. "I told him you'd come." Tears streamed down Thomas's cheeks. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner." "You came," she said, her eyes fluttering. "That's all that matters." As the ambulance pulled away, Thomas rode with her, holding her hand as they drove through the desolate night. Police lights faded behind them. At Alpine Central Hospital, Savannah was rushed in for emergency treatment. Thomas stood by the ER doors, still clutching her necklace, the silver cross they'd found in the truck. It felt warm in his hand, as if it had been waiting for him. Rodriguez met him in the hospital hallway an hour later. "She's stable," the detective said. "She's dehydrated, emaciated, and she's been sedated for weeks, maybe months, but she's conscious." Thomas nodded. He looked tired, very tired. "What about the others?" he asked. "The men who brought her? The ones at the farm?" Rodriguez exhaled. "We raided 2 locations after reviewing Ridge's messages. One at the drop site, the other at an old silo near the border. We're still collecting evidence, but we found enough to build a full case. Drugs, weapons, human trafficking documents, and pigs." Barry walked down the hallway. "He's been found," he said quietly. "Who? Who?" "Terry." Thomas froze. "He's alive?" he asked. Barry nodded, tears barely visible in his eyes. "But yes, he's here. They kept him in a drug lab near Marfa. They broke his fingers, burned his hands, kept him sedated, just like Savannah. I don't think he's spoken in months." Rodriguez interjected. "Ridge handed him over 9 years ago when Terry questioned the camera footage. Told the cartel he was a problem. They took care of it." Silence filled the hallway. It didn't feel like justice. Not yet, but it was something. Savannah remained in the hospital for several days. She was weak, but recovering. And when she finally felt strong enough, she gave a full statement. She told Rodriguez about the night she saw the drug drop, how she tried to drive away, how she was caught, how Ridge arrived 10 minutes later and ordered her bound instead of killed. He said they owed him, she whispered. Said he helped them bury investigations, block state inspections, divert attention from their roots. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "They call me the sheriff's girl, but I wasn't anyone's girl. I was just forgotten." "Not anymore," Thomas said, holding her hand. Rodriguez recorded her statement in full. The last detail she provided was chilling. "They were going to kill me this week. Ridge said it was time to end the story. Said no one would be looking anymore. That 9 years was enough." At a press conference 2 days later, Ridge was brought in shackles. His badge was gone, as was his rank. He said nothing. Not to reporters, not to the judge, not to anyone. But Thomas stood at the back of the courtroom, silent, unmoving. And when Ridge turned his face, a mask of defiance, he saw Thomas there and looked away. That night, back at the ranch, Thomas walked out into the pasture under the stars, the very pasture Savannah had ridden in 9 years ago. The grass swayed softly in the wind. Somewhere in the distance, a cow lowed. She was home. She had survived. For now, that was enough. July 12th, 2024. 6:41 morgens. The morning sun filled the hospital room with pale gold. Savannah Walker lay in bed by the window, her eyes half closed but attentive. Tubes ran from her arms. Monitors blinked quietly beside her. Her hair, once long and proud, was roughly cut, uneven matted, but her gaze was steady now. Thomas sat beside her, unmoving. One hand held hers. The other clutched a notepad Detective Rodriguez had left 2 hours earlier. Inside were names, places, handwritten notes extracted from a sheriff's phone, contacts, payoffs, cover-ups, logistics. It read like a manual on corruption. Rodriguez called it a thread. Thomas called it something else. The truth they had tried to bury. Rodriguez returned later that morning, wearing the same shirt as the day before, sleeves rolled up, eyes bloodshot but focused. He was accompanied by a young officer with a body camera and a tablet. They entered quietly. "Miss Walker," Rodriguez said softly, "are you ready to give a full statement?" Savannah nodded slowly. Her voice was thin but clear. She told them everything. How she had driven out that night with bags of feed in the back of her truck. How she took the long way, tried to avoid neighbors' grazing herd. How she saw headlights in the arroyo. She described 3 vehicles, men unloading duffel bags, white packages inside. How she froze when she saw assault rifles. How one of them shone his flashlight directly into her face. I ran, she said, but I wasn't fast enough. They blocked my truck, rammed it sideways, pulled me out, bound my wrists with zip ties. She paused, then added, then they called the sheriff. Rodriguez didn't interrupt. He just nodded, taking notes. Ridge showed up 20 minutes later. He was angry, but not at them, at me. What did he say? Rodriguez asked. Savannah's voice trembled. He said, she saw too much, and she knows who I am. What happened next? They argued. The tall one, Miguel, he wanted to kill me. Ridge said no, not yet. Said I was leverage, that I could disappear another way. Her hands trembled in her lap. They made me lie in the back of their SUV, drove me to an old grain silo. There was a hidden trapdoor, steps in the floor. I didn't even know places like that existed. Thomas sat beside her, still as stone. They kept me there for months, then moved me again. Sometimes Ridge would come, sometimes not, but they never let me go. What about the truck? Rodriguez asked. Savannah nodded. I overheard them. Ridge said there was an abandoned oil well near Turlinga. So the site was old, unmapped. They dumped the truck, used a front-end loader, brought a boulder to cover the hole. Rodriguez wrote something down. Then he asked, did you ever see Terry Granger? Savannah nodded again. Once at the second house, he was working in the lab. He was limping. His fingers were mangled. Didn't say anything, but he looked at me. Just for a second. Rodriguez was silent for a long time. Then, thank you. He turned off the recorder. You just gave us the last piece we needed. That day, Thomas asked to meet Barry. They met by the hospital cafeteria, under a narrow shade tree, overlooking the back parking lot. It wasn't scenic, but it was quiet. He's awake, Barry said. My brother, barely speaking, but awake. Thomas nodded. Savannah saw him. Barry stared at his coffee. I should be happy, but all I can think about is what they did to him. What they made him do. They didn't break him, Thomas said. Barry gave a short laugh. How do you know? Because he's still alive. Rodriguez called a press conference the next morning. Standing on the steps of the Alpine courthouse, he laid out everything as clearly as an indictment read in broad daylight. Sheriff Clayton Ridge, he said, was part of an ongoing criminal conspiracy involving drug trafficking, kidnapping, and obstruction of justice. He used his position to suppress investigations, manipulate evidence, and ensure silence through intimidation. By then, the media had arrived in force. State representatives, Justice Department officials, even CNN. Rodriguez continued. We've uncovered phone records, audio files, and physical evidence linking Ridge to a dozen illicit operations. Most importantly, we found a survivor, Savannah Walker, who was held captive for 9 years under his protection. Questions were loud, searing. Why didn't anyone notice how high this went? Was the sheriff part of a larger network? Rodriguez didn't answer. He simply held up a folder. We're not done yet. At the hospital, Savannah watched the conference from her bed. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just watched. Thomas sat beside her. They're going to trial, he said quietly. Every single one of them. I know, she whispered. It won't fix anything. But it's something, she nodded, her eyes still on the screen. Will people believe me? She asked. Thomas was silent. They will. I don't need them to pity me, she added. I just want them to know I was real. That I didn't just disappear. You didn't disappear, he said. You were stolen, but you came back. She closed her eyes. And I'm not done yet. The forensic team found a border site where the fake burial had been staged. Pig bones, torn clothing, burned boots. A jacket that matched Savannah's size. Her initials embroidered on denim. They had planned it down to the DNA smears, infused with old blood from a discarded tissue. Thomas read the report and said nothing. Rodriguez said it for him. They didn't just want her dead, they wanted her forgotten. Thomas closed the folder. Then we remember. July 17th, 2024, 6:45 p.m., exactly 9 years to the night Savannah disappeared. She sat in a wheelchair on the back porch of the ranch, the sun sinking behind the hills in quiet oranges and purples. Thomas sat beside her. Horses moved in the distance. Cattle were visible in the far fields. "Still feels the same," she said softly. "It was waiting for you." She looked back. "Do you think people will understand what happened?" "It doesn't matter," he said. "We understand. You survived. That's what matters now." She looked at her thin, healing hands. "I want to testify," she said. "I want to face them." Thomas didn't argue. He just nodded. "You will." That night, Thomas walked into the old tactical room and opened a drawer untouched for years. Inside was a Polaroid of Savannah on her 25th birthday, arms spread wide, standing next to her truck, beaming, dust on her jeans. He looked at it for a long time. Then he pinned it back to the corkboard. Beside it, he added something new, a newspaper clipping with the headline, "Survivor Testifies." Sheriff faces 32 counts in state corruption case. They hadn't found all the bodies. Some names would never be known, but the story had changed. Savannah was no longer missing. She was a witness. She was a fighter. And the silence they had tried to bury had become a storm. August 3rd, 2024, 9:06 a.m. A profound silence settled in the courtroom as Savannah Walker, overcoming her inner tension, stepped forward. The small room seemed to expand, filled only with wooden benches, the cold light of fluorescent lamps, and the monotonous hum of old fans. At the massive table in front, the judge watched her intently, her face impassive. Savannah stood straight, despite her body still bearing the marks of her suffering. A slight tremor in her right hand, emaciation, cautious movements. Yet her voice was firm and clear. "My name is Savannah Walker," she began. "I was held against my will for 9 years, and I remember every moment of it." No gasp, no whisper broke the silence in the room, only the scratch of pens gliding across paper. "During that time," she continued, "I was starved. I was bound. I was used and ignored, and I was told that no one would come for me, that no one was looking, that the people who were supposed to protect me, especially one person, chose not to." Her gaze shifted left, where Clayton Ridge sat in a gray suit, his wrists shackled. He dared not meet her eyes. Outside the courthouse, numerous cameras were already waiting. News vans, crowds of reporters. Microphones extended like predatory claws, eager for a sensation. But Thomas Walker spoke to none of them. He stood by a side entrance, hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the courtroom windows above. He didn't need screaming headlines. He didn't require public acknowledgement. He just needed this nightmare to finally end. Beside him, Barry Granger sat on a low stone parapet, flipping through a folder. The statement from Terry, his brother, had finally been filed, unevenly handwritten over the course of a week. "They made him mix chemicals," Barry said quietly. "Bait piz." He wasn't allowed to speak, even to the other workers. They called him the ghost. Thomas didn't reply, only nodded once, confirming he had heard. "Savannah's testimony is everything," Barry said. "It directly links Ridge to the cartel, to the trucks, to the farms. No one's arguing anymore. They're all turning on him now." Thomas looked down the street. The sun was high overhead, promising another hot day. "Funny," he said, as if to himself. He said that about the heat, too. August 10th, 2024, 11:17 a.m. Savannah sat at the kitchen table, gazing thoughtfully out the window. The ranch had changed little over the years. Her room still held the same blanket, the same boots by the door. Yet the girl who had once left these walls was no longer the same. She had departed in silence, but returned in the light of the storm, transformed and hardened. Thomas poured her coffee and sat opposite her. "They want me to testify again," she said, slowly turning her mug in her hands. "For the next trial, federal charges this time." "Do you want to?" he asked. She nodded. "I want people to hear it, not because I need them to pity me. I want them to acknowledge that it happened." Thomas sipped his coffee, then said, "There's more courage in your voice than Ridge ever had in his badge." Savannah offered a faint smile. "And you?" What about me? Do you still think you waited too long to call the police? Thomas didn't answer. Because he did. Every single day. Rodriguez arrived at the ranch later that afternoon. Dust still clung to his boots, a testament to hard work. His tie was loosened, and a new notepad protruded from his back pocket. They're turning on each other fast, he said. We have statements from 2 cartel lieutenants saying Ridge was their key link. He handled safe routes, shut down raids, and passed on intel. Anything else on the other farms? Thomas asked. Rodriguez nodded. We found another silo, northern edge of Brewster County. Looks like it was used the same way. Underground chambers, 2 sets of restraints. He didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. Savannah wasn't the only victim. That night, Thomas sat on the porch, watching the sky fade into the last light. The horizon pulsed red with distant oil rigs, like the desert's heartbeat. Stars appeared one by one, scattering across the dark canvas. Savannah came outside, wrapped in a thin blanket, and sat beside him. You should be sleeping, he said. I've slept enough for 9 years, she replied. Can I sit? He nodded. They sat in silence for a while, broken only by the chirping of cicadas, which had resumed their nightly song. Somewhere in the pasture, a horse neighed softly. I don't know how to move on, she said. You don't have to. She looked at him in confusion. You don't move on, Thomas said. You carry it like a scar, like a limp, but you keep going anyway. Savannah didn't reply, but she reached out and took his hand, and he let her. August 21st, 2024, 3:23 p.m. Terry Granger was discharged from the hospital. He now moved with a cane, his right hand bandaged, bones still healing after years of neglect and torture. But a smile touched his face when he saw Barry waiting for him outside. The brothers spoke little, just embraced. It was enough. Rodriguez escorted them to a safe house up north, out of state. Terry had agreed to testify as a key witness in the federal trial. Until then, he would be under protection. Before leaving, Barry handed Thomas an envelope. Inside was a photograph. 2 boys, one in a sheriff's cadet uniform, the other in a baseball cap too big for his head. Both smiling, their mouths full of braces and corn chips. Proof, Barry said, that we weren't always surrounded by monsters. August 30th, 2024, 6:58 p.m. The sunset that evening was a little softer, less red, more gold, spilling across the sky. Thomas sat on the porch, Savannah beside him. They watched a few cows amble across the ridge. The dog barked once, then settled back into a doze. Savannah turned to her father. Will you ever forgive him? Thomas didn't need to ask who she meant. No, he said. Savannah nodded. Me neither. Then, after a pause, she added, Good. Ridge was convicted on 37 counts, including conspiracy, human trafficking, obstruction of justice, and aiding and abetting unlawful imprisonment. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read. Ridge said nothing, but for the first time, he looked to the back of the room where Thomas Walker stood, not with hatred, not with fear, but with something colder, with clarity. After the trial, Thomas returned to the ranch and walked the west pasture alone. He went to the fence line where Savannah's feed bags had been found 9 years ago. On one post, there was still a mark from where her truck had once caught, a faint din in the wood, smoothed by wind and rain. He touched it and stood there long after the light faded. The past hadn't gone quietly. It had clawed its way out of the dirt and spoken. Through her, through him, through the broken, unfinished truth that couldn't stay buried. September 4, 2024, 7:41 morgens. The desert was still quiet, but it was not the quiet of peace, but the quiet of an aftermath. The kind that follows a long overdue storm. Rodriguez stood beneath the skeletal remains of a windmill on the Hartley property, his boots crunching on the packed earth. Behind him, the final exhumation was underway. Cadaver dogs, forensic experts, an excavator on standby, all ready to work. He turned to Thomas, who stood just outside the caution tape. You didn't have to come, Rodriguez said. I came. They both looked into the open trench. Bones had been found. Not Savannah's, not Terry's. These were older, smaller. 2 sets. Another girl, Rodriguez said. Maybe 2. Thomas didn't reply. He just watched. Rodriguez added, this place wasn't just used for drugs. That's clear now. Thomas exhaled. How many do you think there were? We don't know yet, but I promise you one thing. We won't stop. Thomas nodded once. Good. Back in town, Savannah walked into the sheriff's office, head held high, footsteps firm. It had taken time, therapy, medication, memory work. But she had asked for it, even insisted. She wanted to see the place Ridge had controlled. It wasn't a statement of victory. It was a confrontation. The officer at the front desk, younger than she expected, stood as she entered. Miss Walker, he said softly. You don't have to be here. I know, she replied. She walked down the hallway alone. The walls were lined with photographs of past sheriffs, men in starched uniforms, with serious eyes. Ridge's photo had already been removed. An empty space marked his absence. She stopped before it, looked at the empty frame, then walked on. Later that day, she found herself in the west pasture. Where she had been headed the night, everything changed. It seemed smaller now. Time had distorted its size. What had once felt vast and distant was now just dry grass, a fence line, a gentle slope to the hills. Her father met her there, a thermos in one hand. Remember the mule you rode out here? He asked. Lacey? Yeah, Mina, a rattlesnake. Savannah smiled faintly. She hated everyone but me. Smart mule, Thomas said. They stood together in silence. Savannah looked at the ridge. Do you think they ever came out here? She asked. Those men. Thomas shook his head. Too far, too open. Funny, it's the only place I thought about. All those years, I pictured this field more than anything. He didn't ask why. She told him anyway, because this is where I thought I died, and now I know I didn't. September 11th, 2024, 3:03 p.m. Rodriguez personally delivered the final report. They met in Thomas's office, just as they had months earlier. The photograph of Savannah on her horse still hung there, but now a framed newspaper clipping had been added. Walker testifies in federal probe. I didn't disappear, I was taken. Rodriguez placed a folder on the desk. Case closed, he said. On paper, at least. We have convictions, sentences, testimonies. He sat down. But we both know this isn't the end. Thomas flipped through the folder. Timelines, chains of evidence, maps, names. Too many of them. What's missing, he asked. Rodriguez leaned forward. One thing. He pulled out a photograph. Grainy, black and white. A storage locker, a silhouette. The date in the corner read, July 19th, 2015, 2 days after Savannah disappeared. Ridge was the last one to access that locker. The logs were carefully removed, but specialists managed to recover data from a backup server provided by the manufacturer. What was in it? Thomas asked. We don't know. It was cleaned out, but the timestamp showed he was there at 2 a.m. Thomas studied the image intently. It's not direct evidence, Rodriguez said, but it carries significant weight. The kind that applies pressure down the line, when details might fade from jurors' minds and press attention shifts to new events. He stood. If you ever want to bury that photo, I'll understand. Thomas didn't take his eyes off the picture. I don't intend to. Rodriguez nodded, then left. September 18th, 2024, 4:12 p.m. Savannah was back in the saddle. She didn't ride far, just along the edge of the pasture. The new mare was docile and compliant, perfect for someone relearning to ride. Thomas watched her from the fence line, arms crossed, his heart swelling with emotion. It wasn't just about riding. It wasn't about returning to a routine or reclaiming lost memories. It was about movement, about moving steadily forward. When she turned toward him, he saw an expression on her face he hadn't seen since that fateful evening before her disappearance. A certain inner glow. Not yet full happiness, but something very close to it, a harbinger of hope. October 2nd, 2024, 8:56 a.m. They traveled to visit Terry in northern New Mexico. The medical facility was clean and quiet. Barry met them at the entrance. His brother waited in the courtyard, a blanket on his lap, and the look in his eyes was meaningful and attentive. A smile touched his face at their appearance. Savannah approached first. Not a single word was spoken. She silently sat down beside him. Terry extended his hand and gently placed it on Savannah's. Thomas stood behind them, the morning sun's rays gently warming his back. The desert had sought to swallow them, to erase them from memory, but here they were, resilient, still visible, despite everything. October 10th, 2024, 6:01 p.m. The truck no longer existed. The state had completed all necessary procedures with it. Fingerprints, soil samples, and minute fabric remnants had been meticulously collected. They offered to return it to its owner, but Thomas declined. Instead, he stood over the empty patch of ground where the vehicle had once rested. The drilling equipment had long been dismantled and removed. The resulting hole had been filled, yet the scar of what had transpired still remained visible in the earth. A slight depression and a noticeable discoloration of the soil. Savannah walked up and stood beside him. She looked at the ground. They thought no one would ever find it. They were wrong, Thomas said. She knelt, gently placing her palm on the earth. They only buried the physical evidence, she said, but not the truth itself. November 2024. A Texas magazine published an article titled 9 Years Underground. The Woman Who Refused to Be Forgotten. It recounted the events from their origins to their conclusion, without embellishment or undue dramatization, relying solely on facts. The truck, the oil rig, the cartel, the sheriff, years of silence, and the voice that dared to break it. Although Savannah herself never read the article, she carefully kept a printed copy in her drawer next to her mother's necklace and a worn but cherished photograph of her and her father standing beside a new horse, squinting in the bright sunlight. Final words. Some things certainly can be consigned to oblivion, but not all of them remain so. Some truths inevitably break through to the surface, revealing themselves to the world. Some stories are not destined for a silent end. Some people, seemingly humble and forgotten, find the strength to survive what, by all accounts, should have utterly broken them.